everybody. My name is Gianluca Pescaroli. I'm lecturer in Business Continuity and Organizational Resilience at University College London. I bring the best regards and the greetings of Professor David Alexander, that unfortunately for health issues couldn't take the flight. A little bit of briefing. Who I am and why I'm here. In 2014, I started to collaborate with David on cascading disasters in a big European project named Fortress. At the beginning, I was quite skeptical about the whole concept, but in the process, we saw that there was a lot of potential for doing emergency planning and emergency management in a slightly different way than before. We were lucky enough to be supported by the UCL Knowledge Exchange Grant, and we created a small research group of cascading disasters at our institute named Cascading, at our Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction. This gave us the opportunity to collaborate more with our stakeholders and end users. And in 2017, I had a period of knowledge exchange with London Resilience, that is the team in charge of coordinating and sharing information among emergency management organizations in London. We published a chapter of the guidelines for national risk assessment on cross-border crises and cascading. And lately this year, we finished the publication of our special issue called Understanding and Mitigating Cascading Crises in a Global Interconnected System, together with some other co-editors, such as Luca Gattuso of the European Commission. So we saw in 4 years the field changing completely for something that was mostly just associated with critical infrastructure interdependencies to something that can make the difference in how we do emergency planning and business continuity. Today, I will try to explain our approach on cascading disasters as a vector to put together different expertise from different fields. I will highlight the practical relevance of our work, so from how the theory can be translated in something practical. I may suggest some possible area for cooperation and research. Today, I will focus more on the theoretical part, and tomorrow I will present more practical results of our collaboration with the authorities. If you have any question at any point, please raise your hand. I have no problem to change the presentation as I go. Feel free to make comments, feel free to make questions at any point. What is the key element of our research? While we were in Fortress, we understood that is the context that is evolved. That is an old motto wrote by Bateson in the 70s, but at one point, it made a difference for emergency planning and emergency management. We are used to think about the action, the deployment, just to address the basic human needs. So there's a flood, there is something else. We need to bring supply to solve the situation, keep it under control. But what if society changed since we started to conceive disaster reduction and disaster management as now? So there are other. 15 years ago, I was based in my hometown. I was working in a small newspaper. I was leaving floppy disk in my editor's postal letter to deliver articles. Well, my girlfriend at the time was used to leave messages in somebody else's phone because I was around all the day and she had no clue where I was. Right now, with the Georgian woman, that I started a relation. We were in different countries, so it was because it was something like cheap airlines in the base. We were staying in touch because we had Wi-Fi. Everyone was everywhere, so we could WhatsApp. And everything was associated by the fact that we had butter. But this means that when there is an emergency, when there is deployment, the needs are not the same anymore. And often, emergency planning and emergency management deployment does not consider that in the right way. How this joke means for the way we deal with disaster. How it means in the way we have to shift what we are doing. Well, we gave a definition in 2015 where we defined cascading disasters for the prioritization of that project in a complementary way to the one that is just associated with critical infrastructure interdependencies. We defined that there is a primary impact, There is a chain and network of consequences, but the difference is that in our approach, in the way we see it, focused on how emergency planning and emergency management had to deal with events, there is something else. There are secondary impacts. What I was saying about the battery, the Wi-Fi, the communication, and the entropy. There are escalation points in the emergencies, and this is rooted in how complex vulnerability interact together. There is this amplification process goes up that is also always often associated with critical infrastructure disruptions. In other words, looks like that. We were used to think about the trigger, flood, the earthquake, delivering the supply, cause effect. Instead, there is the trigger, the punch, and what happens if the spine, the backbone of what we do. Oh, what happens if the communication goes down? What happens if the Wi-Fi, the battery goes down? What happens if the global supply goes down? Which are the points that escalate in the emergency, and what if this becomes the center of the emergency? What if our emergency services that start to deploy for the flooding then have to deal with something completely different? And that's what I will show in this presentation. And how to merge that with other approaches such as critical infrastructure and dependency modeling or interconnected risk. So how, for example, an earthquake interacts with a tsunami that interacts with something else. This is the paper that we wrote in 2016 and we published on natural hazards. Taking back what Daniel was saying, we don't believe that cascading events are low impact, low recurrence probability. They are rooted in society, they are rooted in the way we are doing, the causes are already there. It's not coincidence, it's not just a domino effect liner, it's something that escalates, but the source of escalation is already there. And we can actually understand together how to address vulnerabilities, how to understand this path of escalation at the different level, from the environmental on the top of this picture to the lower one, in the critical infrastructure domain, in the organizational domain. We can understand how to address feedbacks. It's difficult, it's a headache. Every time I start to work on a new paper, I normally have the first 2 days of it on my job. It's too complex. But we can try to derive this complexity to something that can be useful for what we are doing every day. And these rules are there, so we can collaborate together in understanding them better and implement the escalation process. Let's make a test. Think about the triple event in Japan. Everybody aware of it? I guess so. There is an earthquake, tsunami, impact of critical infrastructure, and Fukushima. That was the final man-made disaster by the Commission. So, please raise your hand. When you think to this triple event, do you associate it with the earthquake? Hands up? Nobody? So when you think, yeah, when you think to the triple event in Japan, do you associate it to the earthquake?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody else with the tsunami?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody else with the?
Yeah.
Okay. So the point is that every time I make these questions, it's just to show that there is not just one disaster in the process. There are 3 different disasters, and we are not sure which one is stronger. For me, for example, the most long-lasting effects are associated with Fukushima. For somebody maybe in the geophysical domain, is the critical point to observation is the impact of the tsunami. So it's so different in the escalation process. And the way we picture it is different, but what implies that? That there are some spots in common in the way we deal with emergency planning, and there are some spots that are common in the way we deal with this escalation process. Again, in the eruption of the volcano of 2010, I won't ever be able to pronounce it. Unfortunately, David corrects me every single time. Is that the problem? The problem was the ashdot? Definitely not. Think about the map. Did you have any kind of skin effect here? Was anybody in this room stuck? Cool. David was stuck in London at the time and he had to go to stay with his uncle. One of our former students was stuck in Hong Kong. But the problem was not really the ash cloud, right? The problem was that the ash cloud was on that. That is the map of the global interdependent cities, global cities. So it was here, and where all the networks are interconnected. So, is this making familiar to anybody of you? This is the map of shipping. So we would say that if we think about the other one, so the old flights, and this one, there are not so many differences because there, in those cities, the vulnerabilities are already there. They are the points where everything is more interconnected. If something goes down, there is maybe something else that goes down as well. Or what if it was a problem with the GNS, the GPS, Global Positioning Systems? Harbors are there, ships are there. So the way the global chain of supply could be affected could be similar. And let's make instead something like more local. Or what I was saying about flooding, about how the way society changes can impact emergency planning. I'll make two examples. One was a small flood that was in York, in the UK, and another one in my hometown. The first year I had the doctorate in Parma, in Italy. So in York, there was flooding, quite common in the UK, unfortunately. Then this happened. So at one point, an ATM went down, ATM up. So you couldn't actually take cash out. In the UK, everybody now pay contactless. This changed a lot the way emergency services had to deal with the event. Because before, 10 years ago, they had to deal with the water. Now, at one point, they had to deal with the fact that people were without food in an area not flooded, simply because they had no cash. They couldn't go to shopping. The automatic cashier, they are everywhere now in the UK, can take anything. So we had actually somebody that was in the house, safe, but also without food. And again, this is very clear in the development of the event. So there was a DSS secondary emergency that came up, and the emergency services had to deal with it. Or in my hometown, there was this flood. This was an hospital, so it was a big deal for them and for us, but nobody died. What happened though? There was death. Maybe Shira was affected too. There was a telephone hub that everybody forgot about. Yeah, were you affected?
No.
My parents were affected 25 kilometers from the flooding area, 300 meters of heat. No water. There was not even a building so high in the Athens, but they were 3 days stuck without mobile. The effect of somebody like me was that my sister that lived 40 kilometers away from them had to go knock to their door and say, hey, how are you? At the local level, the implication of that was that even people that were not affected by the water were not able to call the GP, or the all vulnerable population that were not in the flooding area become a problem for the emergency services. So when you think about a trigger, it's not just a trigger anymore. It's what happens when the critical infrastructure interdependencies many of you work on goes down, and which are the implications for emergency planning and emergency management. What means for deployment at the practical level. So like that, right? We are focusing on the first thing, and we are missing what is happening on our back. But this gap that is falling, we have to deal with it. Maybe broken something, or how we plan for that? Which are the vulnerabilities that goes on? We have to consider the cascading a complex event then. It's not the trigger, it's what happens next, it's what escalates. How to do that? How to do that? There are some tools that exist already in emergency planning, like impact analysis, impact trees, modeling tool. We have though to adapt scenario, adapt training. In training, such as scenario building tabletop exercise, we have to identify escalation points, so which could be the secondary emergency came up, which are the vulnerabilities, the root causes, and have some stress tests, but this is possible just by dialogue of critical infrastructure provider and academia. And we need to adapt policies and planning to take account of possible cascades. So to take account what we stack as data. This is a paper that we published earlier this year that is a cross-disciplinary collaboration. At one point, we tried to understand if our approach was actually true. So if there could be common escalation path between different events, different triggers. And we started to talk with a former colleague of mine of the University of Bologna, my former professor Giacomello, that works on cybersecurity. And on the other hand, there was a physical scientist, my dear colleague Robert Weeks of the Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction, that is a space physicist that was used to work on for NASA and as a couple of satellites somewhere in the orbit. And we put together that and we showed, yeah, both things are like totally man-made with some maybe root cause effects. And extreme special events have common vulnerabilities. For example, global positioning system can go down in both cases. And what happens if it goes down while there is something else, like a compounding event, like something like a flooding again, or a storm, and you have to deploy in this case? Well, the non-emergency services simply are the first victim of the process. But we can mitigate that with positive feedbacks and reducing vulnerabilities. It's not just a matter of worst-case scenarios. Coincidence exists, and the number of coincidences are high. It's not just a matter of low probability, because low probability can happen tomorrow. At the early beginning of that paper, finding a common language between me, my former professor, and my colleague Robert Weeks in space physics was quite dramatic. It was shocking. For me, low probability means if I speak with a policymaker on that, they receive a, oh, this won't ever happen. For him, is like a scientist, so very, very close by. But we have seen a couple of worst-case scenarios. Like in this case, it happened exactly like that. There was the blackout, but there was 1 hour in which emergency communication were degraded because there was a huge space storm in the process. This is the paper we just published. What happens is that the way we are approaching vulnerability and cascading goes more in the assessment of vulnerability in the social organizational domain, but this can be complementary to all the other processes of compound, interacting, and interconnected risk. So the way you assess all the rest. We can support with that by the action of policymaker, identify gap and priorities, verify cascading risk and critical infrastructure and interdependencies are sufficiently addressed in multi-agency planning. And we can increase awareness of our stakeholders. In the last 2 minutes, I will simply explain very briefly our experience with under-resilience. What we did with our local authorities, first we assessed the perception of cascading risk in London. Then we proposed together with them how these secondary emergencies can be addressed in planning, and we released some guidance. Now, the next step, we are focusing on GNS failure with the government. And we will want to understand how people behave, what information they need, and translate that in scenario to be used for emergency planning and emergency management. So the theory we said, as practical implication, is just a matter how to see it. In our case, we are providing the material for training and to support the scenario building. So how cascading effects looks like for business continuity and organizational resilience. My conclusion is that society is complex. All disasters probably in the future will have a certain dimension of cascading. We need much more investigation of the components. We need interinstitutional dialogue, and we need much more case studies. What we did was mostly based in London, or with European case study, we need everything else because we have no idea. And it's a collaborative process. I hope that I will learn a lot from you in the next 2 days. If you have any questions, please do get in touch. As I said, tomorrow we'll focus more on my explanation on the part of the guidelines that I said. So how we translated that in operational practice for end users, together with them. Again, it's a collaborative process. If we understand which are the vulnerabilities that are rooted in our society, in our organizational process, and in our emergency management process, then we can address this escalation together. The images are different for theory because we can produce new data such as on risk perception, but also for practice because they change in the long term what they're doing. So I guess mechanism, probably. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gianluca. We have time for a couple of questions. Is there any question for our speaker? No? No question? Well, I have a question. So, when you try to translate from, let's say, from one country to another, you, for example, suggested the example of Parma and then Newark. Do you see differences that are more related to the cultural aspects and to how communities actually behave in time of a disaster?
Yes, definitely. So all the process is definitely context dependent. So I'm not sure how much of that can be real here. I think a large part, but the more data we have, the more people try to apply our case studies, or the more we deal with other stakeholders or other colleagues all around, the more we can understand those differences. All disasters have a cultural component, so everything is different and is context dependent. For example, what is true in London, in my hometown was not true. For the ATM, there is not such a high dependency. If you go in the Apennines, you can, if you try to pay with the card, they're looking at you like, the Apennines are mountain area that is like 1 hour kilometers from the center of my home, for my hometown. And for sure, what I'm saying about what happened in York with the high dependencies of ATM is not true there. So what we are saying is that there are some drivers, but the vulnerability assessment is local. It's done with the local organization, and the organizational resilience process has to be done collaboratively with the stakeholder at the local level, because they know what is going on, or they could be interested to understand it better. But the driver is putting together a vulnerability assessment, try to understand what is escalating, and what is escalating is maybe different in every single place. There are some general drivers like, okay, we are becoming more globally interconnected. This is true, this is everywhere. But there are some places that are extremely interconnected, like London. There is some where they are less interconnected, like my hometown. And there will be something else there. Maybe they're not interconnected at all. Maybe they are still having other problems, and they still have the problem that the house is going down, that's all. So it's totally context dependent, and if you have case studies to share, I'm super happy to learn from you.
Any question, please?
From a modeling perspective, if the key is triggering events, and these are only recognizable after the effect, because you can't predict them, how do you incorporate them into a model? Right, because it's only ex post that you know that this was a triggering event, this was the critical juncture which caused the disaster to take on a new pace or a new trajectory. But you only see that afterwards. So if you're trying to model this up front, how do you incorporate it?
So I wish to go back in the slides because of the paper we published on risk analysis this year, the one where there was let me check, okay, how can I go out from here? Anyway, okay, I was there. So the thing is, sorry, we can incorporate that in the same moment in which, in the same moment in which you're doing a complementary job, we can put them together in a multi-criteria support system or tools for doing scenarios, to adapt scenarios. Is adapt, but training is done before the event. So it's a learning process. We have the data for modeling on that, but then we can use the modeling or the output of the modeling to improve scenario building. So it's an ongoing process of learning and eventually also providing, for example, a decision support system, improving the early warning system and integrating together in the training of emergency planners and emergency managers. So for me, it is very clear. The vulnerability assessment process, though, it's all together of this aspect. So the more you learn from this modeling, the more then this can be used for emergency planning. For, let's say, I'm working with the authorities in London. I'm trying to define a scenario in which, a flooding scenario, and I can use that to integrate it in a support system. Or simply I can learn from a hierarchy to say, okay, at the practical level, you may need that. Then let's try to visualize that and let's think this and the other things you know, which could be the common point that stuck your deployment.
Okay, another one, okay, oh, wow, more too, okay. Yes, please.
Gianluca, just touching upon a few discussions that we had
Oh, yeah.
some time ago. One of the things I still don't understand is how the cascading disaster concept of today is different from the 80s and Charles Sparrow's, natural disaster or normal accidents. He spoke on normal accidents and everything that followed, where he talks very much about, very similar concepts. And I understand that the world is different and it's more interdependent and so on, but how does the work of this last 4 years that you mentioned, how does it differ from his work and his colleagues' work?
Well, as you know, and your supervisor, I had a lot of discussion on that.
Yeah.
We integrated heavily Sparrow in our theory at the beginning. The difference is that we evolved a bit that and we applied it to emergency planning and practical scenario building. Before it was mostly a theory. We simply systematized the theory for disaster management and disaster reduction and saw how these could have practical implications. So the difference is that before it was just the modeling side. It was like in this picture was more associated to interconnected risk here. What we are doing, we are brought it here. More on, okay, we know that interdependencies are important, but our colleagues of the authority were still asking, well, okay, we know already that this is important, there are those theory. Some of them actually wrote Perro, like some of the really smart guys in the government or like some people that had a doctorate in the planning college. And then they say about what we have to do. So in the moment in which you put that all together like that, you actually cannot have an idea what to do. So for me the difference is very easily that. It's more practical and it's more focused on disaster management.
Is there another question? Yes?
Yeah, I guess following your last sentence, I look at this picture. I don't see where in this picture or in your talk in general I get to a decision. I'm the king of Israel or something.
Yeah.
And I've got to make a decision. That's wishful thinking. I've got to make a decision. I've got to choose to allocate a budget or to build or not build. Where is the decision?
So decision here is definitely not in this picture because this is a theoretical work. Yeah. I would say that the decision is more like associated with the guidance and the checklist. So something I didn't talk about but something like that is when you're doing a business continuity process, we produce some practical questions to support the business continuity process and the scenario building. Clearly, we are not working ourselves. Well, it's kind of a decision because you decide how to allocate the resources in the business continuity planning, in the business continuity management process. We are not doing low-cost benefit analysis, if this is the question. It's not our expertise. There is somebody else that is better to do it. For example, the work of other colleagues at LSE or other colleagues, even in the project where we were working. So we are not doing and we don't have the pretend to work on cost benefit analysis. We can cooperate on that. We can provide to our decision maker a series of support or like that to understand an event which could be the elements that escalate, and then we are not in the position to decide, but we can provide them a better view of which could be the problem that arises so they can decide. And so this one is the picture of the guidance we did with our colleague. The other thing we did for supporting decision maker was a research that we did on perception of cascading risk. That was done to support policymaker because they asked, okay, we have no idea how is the perception of cascading risk in our partnership. It's a partnership of 170 organizations. So they had a workshop. We had a questionnaire. We were quite lucky. There were nearly 60 answers, about 70% and 54%. So we showed that there was a high perception of the risk of cascading risk, also associated with life losses, low integration in policies. Some policies like, okay, and we established a priority of which were the needs in terms of policy and which were the needs in terms of training. Then it's up to them to decide. But these are the tools we can do to support the decisional process. Clearly, somebody is doing modeling can do something else, but we have a clear idea how to put priorities and how to help them understanding which could be the sources of escalation. I'm looking forward for continuing.